This is DW News Africa. Coming up on the program, why have African countries been so successful at combating HIV? And is that about to change? That's the fear after the United States imposes massive cuts on its international aid programs. Also coming up, star author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie visits her hometown in Nigeria as part of her international book tour. And she sits down with DW to talk about her new book, Dream Count. I'm Michael Oku. Welcome to the program. Why have African countries been so good at combating HIV? A new UNAIDS report highlights amazing progress in the fight against the virus since 2010. And sub-Saharan Africa leads that progress. It achieved a 56% reduction in new HIV infections, the steepest drop globally. Drill down into the detail and you find countries that are beacons of hope. They've managed to ensure that most people living with HIV know their status and are getting the drugs they need so the virus in their bodies is under control. Countries like Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, Rwanda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. But that progress has been uneven. Of all the people in the world who need anti-HIV medication but are not getting it, almost half of them are in the sub-Saharan countries where so much progress has been made. Much of that progress was due to one of America's most successful exports, PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. Since it was launched in 2003, it is estimated to have saved 25 million lives, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. But now that's under dire threat. U.S. President Donald Trump announced a freeze in funding earlier this year. What might that mean if it were made permanent? We'll be putting that question to the head of UNAIDS in a moment. But first, here is one perspective from Eswatini, one of the countries that has made progress, yet is dependent for much of that through PEPFAR.
Most of us from this rural community, we do not have the money to access all the services that are provided in the clinics. But when we are together, motivating each other to access the service, the people are capacitated to go and get the service. We need these education sessions where we get the correct information so that we are on the right track.
I'd like to welcome Winnie Byanyima, the Executive Director of UNAIDS, who joins us from Johannesburg and whose staffers, we should mention, are on the front lines of this issue. Winnie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Following Washington's cuts, what are you anticipating for HIV/AIDS programs in Africa, especially in those countries that rely heavily on U.S. support?
The progress that the world had been making over the years, reducing new infections, reducing deaths, is at huge risk with the sudden withdrawal of the largest donor, the United States. The risks are huge. We see countries fighting to step in and replace the resources that have been removed, developing countries, but we see that these efforts still need the support of all the countries of the world. The story of global solidarity must stay. We need the United States and all the other donors to stay the course because we were going to reach the end of AIDS. There are wonderful innovations out there that can make us move fastest to reduce new infections down to zero and come to see the end of AIDS. But it won't happen unless we have the global solidarity.
How bad could this get? Are we talking about millions, tens of millions? Give us some perspective of deaths here.
I have said that deaths could increase by up to 4 million in the next 4 years. Well, to give you a perspective, last year we had 630,000 AIDS-related deaths. So you're talking that in the next 4 years, you could quadruple this and even more. So you're talking of seeing people dying again in visibly, because right now it is more like a chronic illness. If you are tested early and you take your medicine, you will be fine. You can live a long life.
We should make it clear to our viewers that these programs that are at risk support people on a daily or weekly basis, people who are taking drugs. And part of the issue here, I take it, is consistency really matters with the HIV drugs people are taking across Africa. At worst, the funding cuts cut that lifeline and at best disrupt people's regimens. Can you explain more about that?
You're absolutely right, Michael. You see, when people are tested and they are HIV positive and they get onto the antiretroviral, their viral load is suppressed. You cannot detect the virus in their blood. Then they don't transmit. They are safe. But once they stop taking their drugs, it can take a matter of days or a few weeks before the virus is back in the blood system and they are now able to transmit to others. So they become infectious. Secondly, when they stop taking their drugs, if they come back later, their drug resistance grows. The same drugs that others are using now become less and less effective because people are on and off them. They are not consistent. So in both ways, we get a reversal, a real reversal with more transmission because people are now not virally suppressed. And you get drug resistance that people are taking the drug, but they are not suppressed because they are resisting the drug. So it's dangerous. It is risky. We need to keep the 31.6 million people in the world who are on treatment today, to keep them on treatment. And we need to find another 9.2 who are not yet on treatment and get them on treatment.
A difficult question, but I think a practical one. What do you say to people who argue this episode tells us African countries should stop expecting handouts, as they would put it, start fostering less dependence on single major donors like the U.S., and generally be more self-reliant?
You know, I find that actually offensive because it assumes that developing countries, African countries, are sitting there receiving and not doing anything for themselves. That's not true. First of all, as I said, this is a global pandemic. We don't even know where it came from. It may not even have started in Africa. But when it hits a part of the world that doesn't have enough resources to fight immediately, then it spreads like a fire. That's what happened in Africa. When they made antiretrovirals, we were denied them. And that's not about charity. That's about making a life-saving treatment available for everyone to buy to be able to save themselves. So a global pandemic needs a global solution. If you do not solve it together, it will still come back to haunt you. It will fester in the poorest region, but it will come back to haunt you. So there is no question that developing countries are not putting in their best. In fact, they put in more of their resources than is acknowledged. Their hospitals, their health workers, their social workers are all working on this disease. But you do need the other countries where the disease also came from to put on their share so that we solve the problem. South Africa, where I am, has been a leader in global research on HIV. When they pulled away their money, the Americans, South Africa has continued to lead in innovating on vaccines, on investing in a cure, by partnering with the Gates Foundation, partnering with Wellcome Trust to continue the global research. That research is for the whole world, not just South Africa. So really, it is wrong to look at a global problem like it is a charity to help countries that are still lagging behind. They lag behind because there are structural inequalities in the global economy that don't enable them to collect all the resources that are due to them that could help them end this pandemic. So really, It's not charity. It's global solidarity. Global problems need global solutions. That is our point. And right now, our report says that there is a major disruption that needs all the countries to come hands on deck to get us back on track to end this disease by 2030. It's still possible. There are new medicines that can help us move faster. There are new treatments and new prevention tools.
Okay, we'll end it there. That's Winnie Byanyima, the Executive Director of UNAIDS. Many, many thanks to you.
Thank you, Michael.
Renowned author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is visiting Nigeria as part of her international book tour for her latest novel, Dream Count. In Lagos, fans turned out in large numbers to meet the celebrated writer of Half of a Yellow Sun and Americana. While her tour has drawn large audiences, Adichie expressed equal passion for connecting with her Nigerian readers. We'll hear from Adichie shortly, but first, DW's Olisa Chukwuma traveled back home with her to the author's birthplace in Enugu State.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is no stranger to adoring fans. This time in Enugu in southeast Nigeria at the Things Fall Apart Festival, honoring the legacy of Chinua Achebe, widely regarded as the father of modern African literature.
I'm here in this beautiful city of my field. I am here in the city of my birth.
Chimamanda's public presence in Nigeria marks a homecoming tour promoting her latest novel, Dream Count. It's her first in more than 10 years.
For many here, eager to get her autograph on a copy of the new book, it's been a long wait. For others, it wasn't just about the autograph, but a rare chance to finally meet the author whose work has captured their imagination.
Meeting her in person was just very ethereal for me, like it was out of this world for me. And she gave me a hug, and then she drew a love sign on my book, so I'm just like, thank you. Yeah, so it was nice meeting her.
She's my favorite author, actually, and I really like her work. So to get her autograph on a copy of her book and to see her in person was a lot to me.
Part of her homecoming took her back to her secondary school in Nsukka, a town that influenced her first novel, Purple Hibiscus. There, she was hosted by the school officials and got to meet some of the excited students.
It's really nice to have her around us because we have heard her stories and that she was part of us and one of us and has become somebody internationally. So it's really great to have her in our midst. It's like a dream for some of us that are here.
I read one of her books, Half of a Yellow Sun. It was really nice, and meeting her was, I feel blessed. I am very, very lucky because many people would have loved to meet her as well. So I feel very, very blessed.
For the students here, Chimamanda's visit serves as a reminder that they too can achieve success and that the next generation's dreams count.
We should mention in Dream Count, Adichie tells the story of 4 women whose lives take unexpected detours, something she experienced herself during a sudden bout of writer's block. My colleague Olisa sat down with her and started their conversation by asking how she managed that challenge.
It was sort of a week in which I kind of felt, I like to say to my family and people I love, that the spirits have started calling me. So there's a feeling that I had that the spirits have started calling. And it's a feeling that makes me very happy, but also makes me very anxious. Because I'm thinking, the words are coming back, but what if they don't actually really come back? What if they dry up again? What if I write only one page and then it dries up? So it's joy and anxiety mixed together. And so it kind of happened over a few days. And then I really went into the writing, and I was obsessive. When I'm in my writing space, when I'm creating fiction, it's a magical, strange thing. I am absorbed in it. It's all I want to do. I wake up thinking about it. I go to bed afraid that I'll wake up and it will be gone. So I go to bed thinking about my characters. I wake up thinking about them. I cannot wait to go back to them. That's what it's like for me when I'm writing.
Well, the characters are quite interesting, but Dream Count maybe can be quite a tough read. You explicitly address, issues about women's physical experience for women, childbirth, fibroids, even the dark sides of pornography and its effects on women, and even female genital mutilation. But how was it important to directly address these issues in this manner? Because we don't get to hear or read about this in popular literature.
Yeah. I think it's really important to talk about the things that matter and to talk about them in literature in a very direct way, because I think only literature can do that for us. So I've heard from men, mostly men, who found certain sections very tough. Because I think it's something with which men are unfamiliar. Women are much more familiar with it for obvious reasons. Women experience these things. And I think when we talk about it in general, there's a kind of glossing over of the actual realities, the grittiness of it. And this is the thing I think literature can do. Literature can take us inside, and nothing else can. If you write in journalism about childbirth, I think in some ways you're constrained because you can't, you sort of have to hold back. I can imagine an editor saying, no, let's take this out because readers might find it a bit too, readers might get squeamish. But in literature, you have room. And I just think that it's really surprising how little how little we read in literature of women's real experiences, And I find it fascinating because, we all came from a woman's body. But we know so little about women's bodies. Even many women know little about their own bodies because often women's bodies are shrouded in shame. You really can't talk about. I remember as a child, the idea of periods was something you were supposed to be ashamed of, And the older I got, I started to question, why should I be ashamed of something that naturally occurs in my body? Something, by the way, that the human race requires in order not to go extinct, right? I mean, periods happen because women ovulate, and without ovulation, pregnancy cannot happen. And so really for me, I wanted to write about women's lives in a way that is true, right? It's really true, is honest, is direct, might not make us comfortable, but I think it's good for us. We should know these things. We should normalize them, because by normalizing them, there's the possibility of removing the shame, and that I think is worth it.
Really worth it indeed. Quite a good read. Well, Chimamanda, I have to ask you this question. When it comes to the publishing sector for a writer, there's this thing about, or this concept or issue about African stories that sell internationally. You even referenced it with Chiamaka, who's also a writer, a character in the book, with the struggles of how to get her book, her material, published by Western publishers. What needs to change? Your experience in this, what needs to change in the literary scene for better representation of stories?
What needs to change? I think a part of me is actually reluctant to talk about that because I don't want to spoil market for any African writer. By which I mean, I think there are different kinds of African stories, obviously, we know that. But I also think that, to generalize, the Western publishing space is much more drawn to stories that fit certain stereotypes of Africa. Stories of suffering, stories of poverty, stories of conflict, right? And I think those stories are important. But it worries me that often they become the only things that people know about Africa. So that when you write other stories, middle-class stories, stories of not so much conflicts like war, but more interpersonal conflict, the kind of more, the conflicts of hope and love and despair, that kind of thing. It surprises certain Western gatekeepers in publishing. So that's what I wish would change, that the gatekeepers of publishing really should have a much wider idea of what Africa is, because they do that for other parts of the world, right? I mean, or for their parts of the world. So I think if an American, I'm going to use American because America is the biggest market. If an American writer wrote about guns, that's okay. If an American writer wrote about something very peaceful and quiet, that's also okay. But when it comes to Africa, somehow, I've been told by quite a few people that my novels surprise them. They surprise them because my characters are middle class. They surprise them with this book, Dream Count. A woman she's not in my, but she's in publishing, but she's not my publisher. She said to me, "Oh, how refreshing," but trust me, she didn't really mean it in a nice way. how refreshing it was to read about wealthy Africans.
Oh.
So, even the idea of African wealth in the Western space is often, people often talk about wealthy Africans as though somehow all kinds of African wealth has corruption behind it. As though there are not African business people who actually have worked hard for their money. The idea is always African wealth is somehow tainted.
You've spoken a lot about leadership in some of your recent interviews, and even in this book, we see some of that between setting. It's set in America, Nigeria, and even Guinea, both of which, of those three cities or three countries, West African countries, Kadiatu is from Guinea, West Africa. We don't really hear much of that, but you managed to highlight some ethnic, socio-political consciousness at play, in that country. We know that this is a region in terms of its pre-colonial and post-colonial differences and the influence we've had in our region. ECOWAS just had the 50th anniversary of West Africa. Guinea has its own political issues with, coups and military juntas in the region, Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, and the rest, leaving the bloc. Where do you think your thoughts about Nigeria and West Africa are placed in respective to the continent and the world, or this our region?
I can tell you what I think our place should be. What our place is now is, I think, quite shameful. We should be, and I don't say this, there's a natural arrogance we have as Nigerians. And what I'm saying is not coming from that, even though I have a healthy amount of that. But it's coming from just being objective. We are the most populous country in Africa. We have a history in which we have been active in African politics. I'm very proud of Nigeria's support for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, for example. And so we should be in a better leadership position than we are in now, I think. I think Nigeria should be a source of inspiration for other countries in Africa. We're really not politically. I think culturally we are. I think other countries look up to Nigeria's cultural production, our music, our fashion, all of our literature. But politically, not really. And that's a shame, because I think we have everything it takes to be a kind of beacon for other African countries. In West Africa, by the way, I heard that the ECOWAS meeting started like 6 hours late. But anyway, in Abuja, somebody was just telling me. And it's a small point, but it made me think about, this says a lot about why we're not where we should be. The small things matter. If you're going to have a meeting, you should start on time. But I'm interested in, I call myself a Pan-African. I'm interested in this continent. I love this continent. West Africa is particularly special for obvious reasons. I'm West African. And writing about Guinea, for me, was also quite eye-opening, because it made me realize how little I knew about not just Guinea, but particularly the Francophone West African countries. I think that language barrier is unfortunate. But it was also very eye-opening for me just reading Guinean history, which, I kind of knew little bits about, but I was fascinated by it. But also it struck me how all of us have certain similar issues. We all have ethnic issues that have not been managed well. We have ethnic differences that have been politicized in the most negative ways. And in the end, it takes me back to leadership. Leadership makes all the difference. With the right leader, we do not have to have the problems that we have, or they do not have to be as bad as they are, especially the ethnic problems. You can bring people together. You really can bring people. You can make people feel included. You can. In the end, a nation is an idea. And it feels to me that we haven't quite, none of us in Africa have quite, well, sub-Saharan Africa, I can't speak for North Africa. We've not quite understood what it means to create a nation that's an idea. We haven't.
And as someone who's taking on some of these issues, whether from Nigeria, a bit of political history, you think that, but there's a way out? Because with fiction, with things fall apart, now with Purple Hibiscus and other writers, even you, maybe there's a way.
I'm an optimist. I think there is a way out. There can be, if we choose wisely, yes. Nigeria is full. There's so many people in this country today that can lead Nigeria in a much better way than we've been led. But they don't often have the opportunity to get to those positions. Right? So, yes, I think I'm optimistic. I have to be. We don't have any other choice. But I really am optimistic also for just more objective reasons. I think that we now have a generation of young people who are a lot more politically aware, politically sophisticated, who are very clear about wanting better leadership. That's a good sign. And I think it's not just Nigeria, it cuts across the continent. And that's a good sign.
Well, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, thank you for speaking to us on DW.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
And you can watch the full interview with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie on our YouTube channel, as well as our chat with Winnie Byanyima. Just search for DW News. Be sure to check out our other stories on dw.com/Africa, or of course on social media. Again, the handle is @DW News. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.